In this video, we'll be discussing the idea of viewing life as an RPG, and with that we're referring to role-playing games. If you're tuning in expecting to see life as a rocket-propelled grenade, I do apologize. Hopefully nothing will be blowing up in this video. If you're unfamiliar with role-playing games, essentially you play a character on a mission. There are lots of different kinds of missions and lots of different kinds of characters. Some people may be familiar with video game RPGs, while other people may think of the traditional nerd sitting around with paper and pencils, rolling dice. And speaking of traditional RPGs, there are probably none more famous than this one, Dungeons and Dragons. It's become synonymous with the idea of tabletop role-playing games. There's a beautiful simplicity to it, which we'll touch on a little bit during this discussion, but back to the psychology behind it and back to the idea of life as an RPG. Now, in life, we're all different, from our shape, size, and colors of our body, to what motivates us and the traits that characterize us. Likewise, in RPGs, the characters we play in-game all have unique strengths, weaknesses, and backstories. However, unlike real life, in an RPG we may choose to play a race other than human, such as dwarf, elf, or perhaps half-orc. Dwarves typically tend to be a bit shorter and stockier, lower center of gravity, a little bit rougher around the edges. They normally love mining stuff, engineering stuff, building stuff, big old hammers, beer, long beards, even the women have beards. Everybody's got a beard because a beard's manly. Did I mention that they like beer? On the other end of the spectrum, we find the race of elves. Elves typically tend to prize beauty. They tend to be slimmer, more agile, and a bit more fair than most other races. Yeah, and the half-orcs, they're kind of like dwarves. They really like the beer. They're big, they're bigger than dwarves. But they don't think so good. But it's okay, because they fight real good. They like to smash stuff, and they like beer too, yeah. And of course you can just be a plain old human, or one of the other choices that your DM may offer you. There are plenty of reasons people like playing role-playing games. For one, if you're playing the paper and pencil, you get to join up with your friends and hang out for a little bit. If you're playing a video game version, you still have NPCs with which to interact. So it's kind of social. But perhaps most importantly, why we like playing RPGs is that we get to play a character more interesting than ourselves, going on quests and adventures more interesting than we'd ever face in real life. But one of the reasons we don't just all live in an RPG world is that we like our safety, we like our stability of real life. It may be fun to go on an adventure for a role-playing game for a few hours, but there aren't too many of us that willingly seek out a homeless lifestyle in search of defeating monsters for some odd random treasure. At least not the way RPGs do it. But what if we pulled some of the concepts and some of the fun of an RPG into the real world? What if we let our imaginations run just a bit wild to the point that we started to see our friends that are mechanics and engineers as the dwarves? What if we saw our friends who are actors and artists as the elves? And what if we saw those huge, brute-like athletes as half-orcs? Each race places emphasis on the qualities they prize or deride, and we tend to see this in real life as well. Let's consider the idea of the traditional jock versus that of the nerd. The jock prizes strength, speed, extroversion, while the nerd prizes intelligence and introversion. They lack qualities present in the other group. By accepting that these groups are innately different, we can better accept that the different groups should have different interests, different goals, different motivations in their life. There are numerous psychological texts that propose various theories of motivation and personality, but many of these theories prove of little use to people in the real world, and rather just spur on more research or are used for marketing principles. Viewing life as an RPG can help provide perspective into ourselves and into the world around us. Jungian psychology proposes the idea of the persona, the mask, the person that we show ourselves in different situations. The person we become when we're at work, or when we're home with the family, or off with friends, or alone with a lover, are each different. Yet there's still a piece of ourselves. These are all different characters who we play throughout the day, switching our masks, as it were, to best accommodate this situation. Jungian psychology went on to say that through understanding these personas and the subconscious drives that motivate us, we could find a state of individuation, which is essentially being able to do away with the personas and have the truest aspect of self remain. Likewise, in Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he places self-actualization at the tip of the pyramid, noting the importance, but also noting that most people will never reach this state. For us to be capable of finding and exploring our truest selves, we need to examine our strengths and weaknesses. This is fairly easy to do in a role-playing game, as most of the time your character will have what are called stats. Your character's stats are a numeric representation of how well your character fares at certain tasks. Turning once again to Dungeons & Dragons, different role-playing games use different statistics. The 6 stats used by D&D are Strength, Constitution, Dexterity, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. With these 6 descriptors, we can fairly well make a character and understand what that character may look like and behave like. A high number for a stat means your character is well versed. A low number would represent that they may have difficulties when dealing with any tasks related to this characteristic stat. Long ago there was devised a great analogy regarding stats for D&D, the tomato analogy. So here goes. Strength is how strong you are. It's the ability to crush a tomato. Constitution is how physically tough you are. It's the ability to eat a rotten tomato without getting sick. Dexterity relates to quickness and being nimble. Dexterity is the ability to throw or dodge a tomato if thrown at you. Intelligence is how book smart you are. Intelligence is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, not a vegetable. Wisdom, obviously, how wise you are. Wisdom is knowing that even though a tomato is classified as a fruit, it should not be placed in a fruit salad. Charisma is our natural charm. It's our ability to sell a tomato-based fruit salad to people. Now for our in-game character creation, when we're playing an RPG, we roll dice to determine our character's stats. We choose what race we want them to be. We choose in what class we want them to work. Do we want them to be big, strong fighters? Do we want them to be brilliant wizards? Perhaps a wonderfully charismatic bard. In an RPG, we can play to our character's strengths. If we have a very strong individual with a high strength and low intelligence, most likely we would want to use them as a fighter rather than a wizard. If our character has a very low dexterity score, which means they may be tripping over themselves quite often, we probably would not want to use them as a thief. We try to play to our strengths and avoid our weaknesses, and it's much easier to do in an RPG than it is in real life. In an RPG, we can see the metrics, we look at the numbers in order to determine what kind of character we wish to build. Unfortunately, in real life, we don't have a sheet of paper to tell us where our strengths and weaknesses lie. This is something we have to explore and find out for ourselves. But as Abraham Maslow noted, seldom do any of us find this point of self-actualization where we know our strengths and weaknesses and use them appropriately. Martin Seligman, from the realm of positive psychology, would suggest that we live our most authentic lives during our peak experiences, when we are using our talents to the fullest and we are absorbed in the moments. We can consider these peak experiences like boss fights in RPGs. We've managed to fight through lower levels, building up our stats to the point we can now take on a full-blown challenge. Again, with the safety of an RPG, this can be fun. Real-life challenges get scary. There are many challenges we'd rather not face in life, losing a loved one, end of a relationship, loss of a job. All of these challenges bring about changes, which threatens our safety and stability. In role-playing games, we can view these changes from a detached perspective, not so much as good or bad, but simply catalysts to bring on something new, a needed change. RPGs would have little entertainment value were there no antagonistic plots going against us. Events are always in motion around us, but it's the interpretation of these events which takes place internally. What draws us in or repels our character has come from a myriad of different encounters, building up our experiences and our perceptions of events that are taking place.